Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Nick Gaubitch. I'm the head of research for Pindrop in EMEA. And together with Mo, we'll talk about fraud in the contact center. And mostly I'll share with you some interesting findings that we've come across, especially for the fraud scene in the UK. Before I get into that, let me just tell you a little bit about what I'm heading and what we're actually doing. So our research team is a nice gathering of experts in various relevant fields of speech and audio signal processing, machine learning, telecoms technologies, fraud and law enforcement audio. And I myself have worked in this for 15 years by now in various forms and aspects. So at Pindrop, the main thing that we do at the moment from my side of things is work with something called phone printing technology. And this is what we use to analyze phone calls coming into a call center and ultimately catch fraud. I'll just give you a brief flavor of what it is. So what happens is we take a snippet of audio, we analyze this audio and quantify it in terms of 147 distinct features that describe various aspects of the audio signal. Many of those you wouldn't even be able to hear. We then use machine learning technology together with these features, and we're able to learn quite a lot about the phone call based on just this audio snippet. So we can tell something about where the phone call comes from, what type of device was used to make the phone call, and we're also able to track repeat fraudsters with that. I'm not going to dwell too much on this. If you're interested and want to know more, please join my colleagues and myself at our stand. We have some nice demos and some information about various products that we have. Going back to the research, so we never stop. So we have the phone printing technology. We're happy with it, but we're never entirely happy. So we want to develop new technology, and that's one of the things we do as a research team. We continuously come up with new ideas, better ideas to catch fraud. And in order to do that, we're continuously monitoring the state of the fraud scene in the phone channel and trying, well, we want to be on top of things. We want to be as close to the fraudsters as possible in order to have the best technology to tackle them. And what I want to share with you now is really some insights from our understanding of the UK fraud scene in the telephone channel at the moment, with some interesting figures. I have to apologize that some of the stats that I'm giving to you will be from last year because we're about to produce a new fraud report coming out in the next few weeks, and I don't want to take the figures out of my colleagues who've been working hard on putting that together. If you're interested in getting that fraud report, again, please join us at the stand and we can take your details and send it out to you. So, looking at the fraud landscape, what I think is interesting is that I believe there is fraud in every contact center where you have phone calls. There's some kind of fraudulent activity bubbling there. It may be that it results in direct losses, which you see, or it may be some other type of phishing information, so you may not sense the losses straight away. And in fact, what we see often is that in order to lose money, it often takes 3 to 5 phone calls from a fraudster before they hit, right? It may also be that they never hit you over the phone channel. They just get enough information to perform a cross-channel attack. So they use the phone to get enough information to perform an attack online. And although when I say this bubbling, I call this the dark matter of call centers because it's there. And actually what we see so far is that you have about 1 in 900 phone calls is some kind of fraudulent activity. It's a kind of a fraudulent call. Other interesting observations for the UK that we've seen is that about 90% of the fraud happens domestically. So the fraudsters are around us. Maybe not in this room, but around us.
I don't know.
I would come here if I was a fraudster. What we have learned also is that they love to use mobile phones, and they love to hide their phone numbers. And I think initially it seems, well, it's why would you use a mobile phone and not any other means? But actually in the UK, it's quite a cheap means of calling, right? So as a fraudster, you want to save your money as well, and you find the cheapest way you can do to perform your business, and you want to hide as best as you can, and these days you can quite easily hide your phone number. At least that's what you think. And if you take a call center, on average across all your calls, you would have about 50p loss per call. So it's not an insignificant activity that goes on there. So I said that the fraudsters call like 3 to 5 times before they do something. So we're interested to know what do these guys actually do? You know, why do they call so many times? And well, one of the things they do is fraudsters exchange information very often, right? So once a fraudster gets information from another guy, they want to make sure that this information is correct. So they may just give a call and check, did I spend my money correctly? Did this guy give me the right information? They start fiddling around in the account. They might try to change addresses, phone numbers. They just want to feel comfortable, right? It's like you have the key to somebody's house. You want to go and check if it works. And then you move around inside the account until you feel comfortable enough to actually strike. And when you strike, what fraudsters typically do, what we see is they can open up new credit lines, new bank accounts, order replacement credit cards. There's a whole range of activities that they do. But it takes time, so it takes them some time to really feel comfortable within the account. And another reason they don't want to do it too quickly is because it will raise a flag too quickly. The account will be blocked. So they take their time. How they do this, that's very interesting, is to observe fraudsters' tactics, their behavior in this. So I already mentioned that they hide their phone numbers, for example. They can also spoof phone numbers. I don't know if any of you has come across this, but there are some freely available apps for your smartphone where you can spoof any phone number. So I can give you a call and pretend to be somebody else, and it's going to show up as that phone number. So that's very easily done. They do voice disguise, so that's a very interesting one to observe, because partly they don't want to be discovered, so they don't want their voice to be heard correctly, but also they try to impersonate other people. And this impersonation can be anything from very theatrical and sophisticated to plain stupid. You have the classical example of a man trying to pretend to be a woman, and it's really funny to listen to, right? It's, hello, my name is Nick, and I would like to talk to you as a woman. And it's ridiculous, but somehow it seems to work, right? So this is the type of behavior that we see. And I'll get in one level deeper into this to show you 3 of our favorites that we have found so far. So this is the so-called Hall of Shame of prolific fraudsters. And what we do when we play around with this is to give them funny names just to keep track of them, but also they're funny names, but they also characterize their behavior in one way or the other. So if you take Postman Pat, for example, what you see, actually, before I do that, let me explain to you what you see in this messy graph. So here you have the number of phone calls that each of these fraudsters has made within a certain period that we've tracked them for. Next, you have the number of accounts that they've targeted, the number of phone numbers that they've used, and you see that in most cases, it's as many phone numbers as phone calls, which basically indicates that they're hiding their phone number. And here you have the number of voices. So Handyman is clearly an artist, right? He changes voice very often. But going back to Postman Pat, he's a funny character because what he does is clearly intercepts physical mail, and then that's a very cool tactic. So he targets accounts in one postal code area and is able to act as the actual account holder and receive information over the mail, valuable information, and then intercept the mail. And for those of you who live in London or maybe in other places in blocks of flats, but for example, where I live, I get my mail thrown into the entrance hall. And before I get home now, after the conference, anybody could get in there and pick up my letters. So that's a very, very good observation from a fraudster. Handyman is extremely prolific, right? So he made 160 phone calls targeting 13 accounts. 160 phone calls, that's quite a burden on any call center just by itself, right? But he's very good, and we called him Handyman because he always starts, independent on which voice he uses or which account he targets, he always says, I don't have my card handy. So that's the start. So that's the Handyman. And so by doing that, he already puts the scene that he doesn't want to be authenticated by a card number. He wants other authentication questions. And you can imagine what happens afterwards. He's very good. He's very good at fishing for information, getting himself through security, and eventually actually making quite large transactions. On the other end of the spectrum is this polite Welsh lady. So she doesn't do any artistry. As you see, no voice impersonations. She's very calm, very peaceful. She sounds like any ordinary woman who would go into a bank. And she's very good, right? She gets thrown off security questions. She's still good. She recovers. She said, you know, what's your maiden name? What was your maiden name? They can ask her, and she says something. Oh, sorry, yeah, I thought you meant my name. And it's just a mess. But it's very good. She sort of keeps her calm. And you really need help from technology to bundle these things in order to hear that it's the same person. If you only heard one isolated call, there's no way you could imagine that this is a fraudster. So on this note, with this scene, I'd like to hand over to Mo to continue the talk.
Thank you so much. So hello everybody. For those of you who I haven't met yet, my name's Maurice Pentel, Mo, people call me. And I run a thing called the Customer Experience Foundation. And I've got one of the best jobs in the world. I travel around the world advising really big companies and governments about stuff to do with customer experience, business strategy, and stuff to do with behavioral science and technology. And when my good friends at Pindrop asked me to come along and speak today, and I'd heard what Nick was going to talk about, I started doing some research. And what I'm going to share with you now is a quick piece of research. We're on a research journey at the moment around behavior. And I just want to go back very quickly to something that Nick was talking about, our friend Postman Pat. And when Nick told me this story about Postman Pat, I wondered, would that be the same in the States? And the guys said they weren't really sure that this was a big thing in the States, but they asked me why I was interested. And the reason that I was interested in this was because if you steal a letter in the United Kingdom, you may get a very stiff telling off from someone. If you steal a letter in the United States, it's a federal crime. And my point is this, that what we're going to talk about now, everything to do with fraud, and the great example we saw this morning of behavioral engineering is also about culture, is also about the opportunity and finding the quickest path. So I'm conscious of the time. I know we're late in the day, but I just want to talk about a stat that came up. And I read this thing, 92% of, telephone fraud is up by 92%. And because I work for big organizations, what I've done is I've kind of prepared for you a brief on this as a subject. I hope you're going to find this useful. So my first question was this: has fraud changed? Why is there 92% is a lot? It may not be 92%, it may be 91%. Sorry? In the last 12 months. Yeah? Now, my view on figures is this. I think 87.25% of all figures are basically come from bad methodologies or someone's made them up. But what I do know is that when someone tells me it's 90-something%, there's probably something going along. Yeah? So what you're hearing from me today is my view of all of the stats. My view is based on a pinch of salt and the fact that I used to do research, and I know research methodologies have their flaws and their charm and character. So look, has fraud changed? This was my first question. Is the contact center an easy target? Because why is there so much telephone fraud going on? Is the contact center now a more vulnerable target? Why is this important? And then what Nick did was he said, no, I don't think that's the big question. Nick thought the big question was, actually, are we just getting better at finding it? In other words, what I'm going to try and speak to is whether or not there is more fraud or we're just getting better at looking for it. Yeah? So hopefully that makes sense. And here's the piece that I'm referring to. So Financial Fraud Action UK said 92% increase in telephone fraud this year. And I thought about that, and I started looking back, and naturally I started with Pindrop, because they'd asked me the question in the first place. And what they produced in June 2015 was that there were 86.2 million calls a month in the US that were phone scams. And I want to be clear, I've taken this a bit out of context because this only refers to one kind of fraud. And I'm thinking, well, if it's 80, that's an awful lot of phone calls. Maybe we ought to look at this. So I started looking, and what I found in terms of the information was that fraud is becoming industrialized. Fraud is becoming really, really big business. And the thing about big business is when we find something easy that's profitable, we invest in it and we make it grow. We take our successes. Sometimes we take our successes at the expense of our customer relationships because we are short-term thinkers in business. We want this quarter's results. So I wondered about that, and I wondered what I'd find. And what I found was that in every measurable sense, there are significant increases in the number of attacks on organizations and consumers. Here's a piece from KPMG. And what they seem to be suggesting is that attacks on vulnerable people had dramatically increased. I hope I'm not going to switch this off by pressing this button. It reflected a 300% increase targeting vulnerable people. So KPMG think that vulnerable people are being targeted significantly more. Bear with me because I'm building you a picture here. And then the next piece that I found that was of tremendous interest to me was this piece in Security Today. Okay, and what Security Today said, that attacks with social engineering have dramatically increased. Yeah, and the examples they used were IRS agents, security specialists claiming to detect fraud. Yeah, and I thought, okay, that's interesting, but we're in the UK, all right? Not too many people are worried about the IRS over here, except for our American visitors, and welcome everybody. So I looked elsewhere, and what I found was, here in the UK, what we think is that bank police TalkTalk, who somewhat famously allowed a certain cybercrime quite recently, these are the people who fraudsters are pretending to be. And I did some other research, and what I found was a similar thing in France, but a slightly different nuance. And I found in the Far East something else as well. There just isn't enough time and there aren't enough slides, so I'm kind of giving you a view of it. Anyway, so here what we found was exactly the same thing, just a slightly different story in a slightly different way. So I began to have a little bit of confidence about it, and then naturally the Daily Mail, bless them, bank customers warned new number spoofing con. 95% increase in that particular kind of fraud. Again, it's another kind of telephone fraud, slightly different. This is aimed at consumers. And then finally, the last one that I'm going to show you today was this, gang fraud. Now, I want to be clear. What this is about large American bike gangs getting into the business of financial fraud. And the reason that I mention this is there is an organization at the heart of this story, and I'm not going to speak about them because we are videoing, and I don't want them riding up to my front door. But the organization involved had made the clear distinction that doing fraud was a better investment than selling drugs. Shorter jail sentences, lower investment, and massively reduced risk, and no one gets to shoot you. Now, I want you to think about that. Organized crime is a massive global thing. When the world's crooks decide that fraud is the #1 opportunity, it's cheaper, faster, and better than drugs, we have a problem because we're not ready. So I want to speak to that unequalness. And my bottom line is, on every type of fraud, from cyber fraud through to the stuff that we're talking about here, that I'm talking about here, my apologies, in every case I could find dramatic increase. Daily Mail headlines, 90%, 200%, 300%. On every type of fraud, I found massive increases being reported by, I hate to use the term reputable news outlets, because I think that's not quite a correct thing, but certainly everything seemed to suggest that that's the case. And then I started talking to people, and I started having conversations with people, and over the next few weeks we're going to be talking to people all over Europe. But one guy who I spoke to, who I've known for years, he said something really frightening. And I just want to read this to you. Yeah? We know that it's a worsening problem, as this year we've seen a dramatic increase in the number of dodgy calls. I think that they've found us to be vulnerable, and now it's like there's a gang of them hanging around the virtual borders of our operation, and our staff is developing a siege mentality. And I just want to stop there for a second. Our staff is under siege is not something you want to hear. In terms of delivering customer experience, that old thing, happy staff, happy customers, more profits, yeah, siege mentality is a really bad thing, but that's not the scary thing. The scary thing is this. He said it's difficult because they are not stealing from us in the traditional sense, but it's making life more and more uncomfortable. So this guy has a problem. And it comes back to what Nick was talking about, the number of different types of intrusions. When is the crime committed from the point of view of it being serious? Because what this guy's saying is people are contacting his organization in order to elicit amounts of information that they're not then using to create fraud against his company. So it's not his problem. Except for, do you want to be the one on the 6 o'clock news whose organizations helped a criminal gang to steal some old lady's savings, some child's pot of gold? Do you want to be the organization that does that? Put aside for a second your legal responsibilities in terms of data protection under the various laws. Think about the moral thing. Your business is not necessarily geared today to recognize that simply because they haven't stolen money from you, that you ought to be worrying about the overall piece. And I hope what I'm going to do very quickly is convince you that you need to take this stuff much more seriously. So look, everyone talks about omnichannel. I'm in customer experience, and naturally I talk about it a lot. Omnichannel finance, omnichannel science, omnichannel maths. The bottom line is this: as the customers have gone omnichannel, it appears that so have the fraudsters, and that's a huge challenge. Increased attacks on consumers and contact centers focused on gaining financial information appeared to be the result of what I found as I started to talk to people and based on the research. And the increase of those data attacks gives us a real challenge. Because if I am able to spend my time and focus on finding out your mother's maiden name, then really you better not be asking me the question. We are heading towards a situation where knowledge-based identification, where KBA, authentication rather, where KBA is going to become useless if we don't actually stop the attacks where people are just getting our personal information. When they can go online and get it from our Facebook account, hit someone, as you saw in that wonderful video this morning, that great example of social engineering, if we can get that stuff, then KBA becomes useless. How many organizations here use KBA? Ask questions. No one? Oh, okay, at least one, thank goodness, because otherwise this whole thing would have been a waste of time. But, and Nick talked about being able to get an app, right? So what I wanted to do was, I wanted to see exactly what was going on. So the first thing was, there is an increasing level of sophistication, and Nick spoke to that, the number of masked calls that we're getting. But some of the stuff that's going on in terms of masking calls is really quite sophisticated. It's also, some of it is really simple. So this thing at the top here, my apologies, this thing here, I don't know if you can see it, the voice changer, that will allow me to disguise my voice. It's free on the App Store, I think, or 47p. The other one will allow me to spoof a phone number. Again, it's there in the App Store on all of the platforms that you could possibly imagine. So if I want to get into the business of fraud, well, thank goodness for the App Store, because it's becoming easier for me. And if I'm a social engineer, then all I have to do, if I'm a social engineer, then all I have to do is go to the App Store and ply my trade. Because some of these tricks and techniques have been around since Adam and Eve, almost. You know, for those of you who remember the sting, the con is still happening. This is what this is about. It's about tricking people in your contact center because you're vulnerable through them. And I just want to speak quickly to the maths in this. So what I did was I analyzed the probabilities around this and looked at what our probable successful outcome looks like and whether or not we're likely to get there. And here's the thing. I will spend tens of millions of pounds across my enterprise protecting it from fraud. But I can never protect significantly enough against an individual attack that someone will spend money on. Because what I will spend will protect my whole business. What they will spend money on is one single attack in order to break through. Because once you've broken through, then you know how to break through. So from the point of view of the battle, this is not an even fight. Certainly, you know, as Nick indicated, and as you've heard from other speakers today, it's my job to be a fraudster, is the mentality. And from the agent's point of view, if it's one call in 900, I'm really going to struggle to recognize that at the moment. Let's hope it doesn't become 1 in 100 and I get good at recognizing it, because the level of fraud at that stage is going to be significant and dangerous. The other thing is, of course, that fraudsters hide in a crowd. And that's a real challenge from our point of view. They are rushing at our contact centers, where at the moment in the UK it's 1 in 900. So look, here's the thing. Our history as organizations has been about us acting too late. You know who's paying for the cyber war? We are. We funded the other side by allowing them to attack and intrude, and now they've got all the tools, they've got all the technology, and we are effectively funding both sides of the war, in the same way that the government in America unfortunately funded the drug war. Will we do it in the contact center? Will we fail to react quickly enough because our customers are already being targeted on a dramatic scale. So there are a huge number of attacks that are being reported where consumers are being contacted by seeming organizational people who are actually fraudsters, asking us questions, asking us for our passwords, asking us for general information. All right, if I get information from your customer and I get information from your agent, I've pretty much got everything I need to start an online account, move to Barbados and spend your money. Yeah? So this stuff is hugely important. If we don't act now, KBA will become useless. Other kinds of things will happen. And I wanted to explore that with you and try and explain to you my view. But before I do that, I just wanted to talk about the other things. So the guys at Pindrop do some really clever things. There's 147 different metrics they can use to tell whether or not it's a real call. And you heard from other people today who do really, really clever stuff. We're getting better at it. No question that we're getting better at detecting. So it's both things. There is a huge increase in fraud, and we know more about what's going on. And that is kind of an important thing. But the question is it an arms race? And are we going to win it? And will we act quickly enough? So improvement to detections, that's one thing. But if I'm a contact center and I'm not being attacked, if I'm not the bank, where's my incentive to protect my customer until the usual happens, there's a terrible incident, someone gets fined, and then we all take it seriously? So at the moment, where we are is there's a relatively small amount. It's going to increase over a period of time, and I just wanted to speak to what that looks like. The agent is the obvious target, because if you're the organization who gives up that piece of information, you're the one that's going to be making the news. When you think about how this works, I want you to think about it from the customer's point of view for a second. Now, we all live in a world where we're used to being asked our mother's maiden name, but what happens if this gets out of control? So I wanted to just give you a flavor of that, but before I do that, I wanted to give you a behavioral insight. And this is another piece of research that I found. Consumers who don't trust their financial institutions are more likely to suffer bigger fraud. I know, ironic, isn't it? We want them to trust us even though we're not exactly honest with them. We don't exactly treat them well. We have been challenging as partners for them for years, but if they don't trust us, they're more at risk. Who'd want to be a consumer in this world? But something else has changed, and the guys on the last panel spoke to this. We are in a period of dramatic change. Change is not a constant state. We are always in a process of change, but the amount of change is different at different times. Right now, the amount of change is driven by three things. Number one, we are able to deliver to any platform, any device, a service. And how many of you have looked at email on your phone in the last week? Okay, because I want you to wake up now. Good. Okay. How many of you have used Kindle or something like that on a device? It's great. You can go from one device to another. It can find the page that you're looking at. Platform-independent experience. As we move more towards that, okay, it means from the consumer's point of view, change is becoming more rapid because more things are built on more things. The other thing is it's all down to two single points. It's the tablet, it's the mobile device, and it doesn't matter what device you're on. Okay, this stuff is happening really quickly. And then the third thing that's going on is we're joining the dots. APIs, those things are all connecting up all of the functionalities and delivering them quickly. So your customer is now a much more dangerous animal than they used to be, and I'm quickly going to cover that. It used to be if I wanted to find out about your company, what I'd have to do was I'd have to go to your website. Now that's the last place I'm going to go. I'm going to find out information from your competitors, from the regulators, and more importantly, I'm going to find out what other customers think about you before I make any decision to do business with you. In addition to that, I've got better tools. When I started out work, my first job was in this ops center, and I had a telephone the size of this. And it was a business telephone. It cost £2,000 in those days, and I think a phone call cost £1.50 at a time when maybe I was earning £100 a week, just to give you some scale of the thing, right? And everyone I knew wanted one of these phones. Everybody wanted one of these business phones. Now, businesses use consumer technology. We use smartphones, we're using tablets, we're delivering stuff on consumer technology. Consumers have better tools, and that is a challenge. In addition to that, we also have more choice. We have more choice than we've ever had. So if you give up my information to a third party, I'm gone. Not only that, I'm going to tell 8 million people, and they're gone. That's a real challenge. And then the final thing is this. We are really lagging behind in terms of adaptation. The average corporate project takes about somewhere between 18 months to 3 years to deliver. Let me give you 3 stats that highlight the challenge. Number 1, Angry Birds, the first 50 million downloads, 30 days. Okay, here in the UK, we have a thing called the Oyster card on London Transport. From the time you could use your debit card, I believe it was 16 weeks before the sale of Oyster cards dropped by 90%. We as consumers adapt really, really quickly. The other thing is, if you think about it, imagine we have a conversation, you think I'm a nice guy, we might exchange an email, we might get together, we might do a text, we might meet on LinkedIn, Google Hangouts. I can cope with all of that, you can cope with all of that. How many channels do most organizations support today? Yeah, we're behind the curve in every measurable sense as far as customer power is concerned. But that's not the scary bit. The scary bit is this. That's the consumer who isn't even paying attention. What about the fraudster who's trying to pay attention? He has all of that capability, he knows our vulnerabilities, and he's constantly looking for the hole. So here we go. If we don't address fraud in this way, what's the future going to look like?
Okay, number 57.
Can I have a decaf cappuccino, please?
I'm going to have to pop you on hold while I transfer you to the coffee department.
Hi there, how can I help?
She said she's put me through to the coffee department. I don't quite get
Coffee department, sorry, you got through to the lager department. Give me a minute.
it. Huh?
Would you like to make an application for some food or drink today? I just need the first line of your address and your mother's maiden name.
What?
I'm just going to pop you on hold while I transfer you to the wine department. Is that okay?
Double Havana 7 and Coke, please.
Oh, blimey, that's completely on my reach. I'll put you on hold for that one. Okay?
You reserve the right to cancel your fish and chips without prior notification, whereas you do not notify us in writing.
To us.
Hi there, what can I get you? Thank you very much, that's £5.
Cappuccino's £5.
£6, increased charges. Certainly, that'll be £100 of unnecessary charges.
Oh, how much? For a wine? I don't... What?
Yeah, so it's £6 for the wine, and then the rest is unnecessary charges.
No.
I'm afraid I can't accept your payment at the moment.
I'll get you in a minute. I'm going to pull you over the bar. We both have been having a conversation.
I can put you onto our conversation.
Awful.
Yeah, it was awful, yeah.
Eventually I felt a bit angry and I wanted to give up.
Wherever you go, if you pay for a service and it was bad, you wouldn't go back. The service was absolutely terrible, and I thought I'd never come back again.
It's interesting that you all laughed because you recognized the truth in there. But what happens if we fail in fraud? I'm serious. What happens if we fail in fraud? Let me tell you what I think it's going to look like. I think our telephone experience is going to be more like a trip to the airport. I think that the customer experience is going to go down the tubes. That we're going to be suffering the telephone equivalent of take your boots off, take your belt off, please take your jacket off and stand in the queue while we bombard you with rays. If we don't win this battle now, this is potentially what a conversation with the contact center might start with. It's a serious challenge if we don't move quickly enough. So what's the solution? You need a basket of stuff. There isn't a single solution. You need technologies, you need business processes that play well across the entire omni-channel experience. You need stuff that will do it all, but no one piece is going to solve all of your problems. There is no silver bullet in this. There's some fantastic stuff out there, but making it all work as a shield, that's going to be the big challenge for you. It's a blend, as I've said. Yeah? So finally, where did I get to? There's a massive increase in every single type of fraud as far as I can see. It's becoming a massive focus for criminal enterprise, and as such is actually a fundamental threat to our lifestyle. It's a serious challenge to the way that we currently operate today. And although we're getting better at it, the second that we stop moving forward, we're going to lose the war. And if we lose the war at this stage, we're going to be funding the other side moving forward. So listen, I know that's not a jolly story. I wish I was better at telling jokes because I would end on a joke if I could. But I know that that's actually where I think it is. So thank you so much for your time. I don't know if anybody has any questions or if we have time for that. But meanwhile, thank you so much for your time and patience. Thank you.